Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we are talking about working with percents. So a lot of people have trouble with percentages, and that's why I've made this video. So let's first of all just talk in a general way, do some very easy first questions. What is 50% of 30? Well, what this is asking us for is what is 1/2 of 30? Okay, when you see a percent sign, percent means over 100. It's literally what it means. Okay, per is that fraction line, and cent means 100. So there's 100 cents in a dollar, there's 100 years in a century, 100 feet on a centipede. That's what it means. All right. So if you wanted to, you could take the 50% and you could change it to 50 over 100. Because it means, so 50% literally means 50%, right? Then you could say, okay, well that's 1/2 because it reduces. And the of means multiply. So when you're doing math, when you see the word of, it means multiply. 1/2 times 30. Now in the last video we talked about multiplying fractions. Okay, here it is. Right? Comes up all the time. What's 1/2 of 30? Well, if we reduce these, we get 1 and we get 15. And there's your answer. 50% of 30 is 15. 1/2 of 30 is 15. So is this any harder? Maybe a little bit. We can turn the 30% into 30 over 100 and we can multiply by 50. That's easy, right? Because that's exactly what it means. We can stand this on 1 if it makes us feel better. And then we can take the 50 and the 100 and we can reduce them. We can say, well, this is 1 and this is 2 because they both divide by 50, right? This divides by 50 and leaves 1. That divides by 50 and leaves 2. And then we can divide these as well. So we could finish it, so to speak, to start off with by writing 30 over 2. 30 times 1, 2 times 1, and then getting 15 as a final answer. Or we could do, we could say, okay, the 30 goes to 15 and the 2 goes to 1. Either way we get the same thing. Now, did you notice that 30% of 50 is the same as 50% of 30? Does that surprise you? Well, let's see why that's happening, okay? So, first of all, let's do 30% of 50. And over here we'll do 50% of 30. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do this with decimals and with multiplication. So if we turn this into a decimal, it's 0.3, right? 0.3 times 50 is what we're doing. So 3 times 50 is 150. But in what we're multiplying, we have 1 decimal place, which means that the decimal isn't here, it's here. So there's our 15, okay? And here we have 0.5 times 30. Well, we're multiplying the same numbers. We're multiplying essentially 5 and 3 together, okay? It doesn't really matter where that decimal is, on which number it's on. We're multiplying the same numbers in essence, and we're multiplying the same number of decimal signs. So if we take the 5 and the 3 and multiply them, or the 5 and the 30, and get 150, and then say, okay, but there's 1 decimal place in the material that we're multiplying out, we get 15. Okay, so that's why they end up being the same. Okay, so let's do it this way. 20 over 100 times 25. 20 over 100 is what? How does that reduce? It reduces to, because you wouldn't multiply this out exactly like it is, so you would take the 20 over 100, it's 2 over 10, which is 1 over 5, right? So we have a fifth of 25. Now here's another way, so this is obviously 5, because this goes to 1 and that goes to 5, and it leaves us with 5. But let's have a look at how you might see this. So if these ticks represent 5s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, This is 0, this is 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. Okay? And we want 1/5. So these are fifths, right? Because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. So each unit represents 1/5 of 25. And this here is 1/5. And it equates to 5. Does that make sense? Alright, so how do we do this one? Well, 110%, again, we can write any number over 100. So we might want to turn this into decimal form, okay? The way you turn a fraction into a decimal is, if it's not standing on 1, it must be, okay? So this number right now is standing on 100 because this is per, right? 110 per, and the cent is implicit, obviously. So if I want this to be standing on 1, so that it stands all by itself, then I'm going to take the decimal that's currently here. So this one I've moved over 2 units, right? I have to do the same with this one. If I don't, I'm changing the values that I started with, and I'm never allowed to do that. So that means I have 1.1. That is being multiplied by 500. Well, what's 1.1 times 500? Okay, so 500 times 1.1. So this is the old-fashioned way, right? If you have your calculator, you could do this on your calculator, but it's really nice to know how to do some of these fairly simple calculations on paper. So we get a 0 there, a 0 there, a 5 there, put a 0 in the next line, then that's 0, that's 0, and that's 5. Add up your columns and look at how many decimal places do you have in what you started with, what you were multiplying. You have 1 decimal place only. So that means your answer also has 1 decimal place. So 110% of 500 is 550. So here's another way of looking at it. We could say that 110% of 500 is 100% of 500 plus 10% of 500. Well, we know 100% of 500 is 500. And 10% of 500, anything that is 10% of a number that's got zeros on the end, just lop off a 0. So 10% of 500 is 50. And there's our 550. So if you live somewhere where there's a sales tax that is 10%, then if the item you're buying costs $500, you're going to multiply by 1.1 to get your final cost. That's what you're going to pay at the till, okay? Now we're going to look at how to change decimals into percents. So if there's a single decimal place, because the 8 is the only digit behind the decimal, then that number is going to stand on 10. Okay? Now, a percent has to be on 100. So we're going to multiply the bottom by 10 to give us that 100, and we're going to multiply the top by 10 as well, because I have to do the same thing to the top and to the bottom. And once I have a number standing on 100, I've got my percent. Okay, so that's how that works. What about 0.02? Well, here we've got 2 decimal places. And when you have 2 decimal places, they stand on 100. Okay, now that I've got it on 100, what I can do is I could reduce it, but we're not after a lowered fraction. What we're after right here is we're looking for percents, okay? So as soon as I have it on 100, that's really good because that's what I need, and it's 2%. So if there's no 0 here, then it's that percent with a 0 behind it, and if there is a 0, then it's just single digit percentage. What about this one? 2.4. What is 2.4 as a percent? The bottom I'm going to get 100, and the top, what's 2.4 times 100? Okay, so if you multiply any number by 100, you take that decimal wherever it happens to be, and you move it that way, 2 units. So this is equal to 240, right? So 2.4, 2 units, that's your new decimal location. So 2.4 times 100 is 240. So that's what the number on 100 is. And so 2.4 is 240%. So how do we change this into a percentage? Well, what we can do with this one is we can make the 25 be 100 by multiplying it by 4. Okay? So if we multiply that by 4, we get 100. And we have to do the same thing to the top, which gives us 32. And once a number is standing on 100, you have your percentage. This literally says 32%, but we shorten it to look like this, okay? All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Give me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.